Hello! So the first thing we're gonna work on here is this grass. I've got my research image here from Clara. So first thing I noticed is it's a very short grass. It's been recently trimmed, so it has a lot of texture but not a lot of like length overlapping areas. I want to begin by putting down a base layer of sort of mapping the color world of the grass, sort of helping me have something down before I do the texture. So I like to add a little bit of burnt sienna into my greens. It really helps me kind of keep them from feeling too Disney, too bright, too cartoony, and just neutralizes them that little bit of a touch, a little bit of red in it, a little bit of brown in it, helps bring them down. I'm also using a bit of yellow ochre and a few other places to add some life, and a bit of a teal to help deepen a couple areas. But as always, we don't want our green to feel too incredibly vibrant. That's one of the things, I don't know why green, whenever we're painting landscapes, does tend to come out a little bit intense. So I'm going ahead and feathering it in. I'm creating some fine texture. I would probably let this dry down. I'm working on top of watercolor paper, so it's already pretty dry. I've switched to a fan brush. I've done this because the edge of this fan brush actually has quite a bit of texture in it. It's a little broken up. I've put in kind of a tan, some cream, and a little bit of gel medium, and I'm using just sort of a tapping, slight pulling towards me motion to start breaking up and adding some highlights. I don't want those little tops of the grasses to feel too long, so I'm keeping my strokes really short since this is a shorter grass. If I were working with something like in the prairies, we'd work a little different. But since this is more like a lawn grass, I'm working on adding in these highlights. I've done a couple different colors. I'm going to, as it goes into the distance, so towards the top, keep my brush strokes exceedingly short, more like tapping, and as I come to the front, we're going to keep getting longer. So now I'm going through with a bit of that teal, touch of burnt sienna, a little bit of green to add some lower shadows into the grass. As we're coming forward, not only are my strokes getting a little longer, but I'm also increasing the contrast. So in the background, it's going to be more uniform. As it comes toward us, as you can see in the picture, we start to see more of the highlights and the shadows stacked right next to each other, kind of showing the texture, the shape of what this brush does if it isn't mixing on the page over in the corners, so you can see what colors I'm pulling into. If you don't have a fan brush, doesn't have to be a fan brush. It can certainly be anything that has a little bit more of a stiffer bristle, something a little more broken up. Working drier helps to keep that from mixing together. The more water medium you add and load up on your brush, the more likely your bristles are to kind of clump together and become nice smooth brush like we want for other moments. You can also go through with a small brush like I'm using here. Instead of building up texture so all over the board with the larger scale brush, you can use a little brush and build smaller sections of texture, and I'm using it with gel medium and a bit of that medium tone green from the background in order to blend my highlights and my lowlights kind of together and offer a third shade to marry them. So this is a flat brush that has a really stiff bristle. I'm just showing you like you can use anything that has that kind of like bristly texture that you can kind of break up, keep it dry, and almost like a stippling motion with just a little bit of pulling together towards you. It's a really light touch to achieve the kind of like brushiness of it. That's going to help us sell the grass texture. So in the foreground, I am lengthening a few of these. Since it would be coming right up to where the camera is, I want this to feel like the grass here is actually taller in proportion to the grass in the distance. And I'm using my darkest color, and then I'm going to use a bit of a highlight tone right in next to it to bump my contrast levels in the foreground. And these I'm doing more like individual like blades of grass versus working with a larger brush and creating the textures like we did in the back and as a foundation. So anywhere that looks a little bit too choppy, I've got a heavy on the glaze medium glaze here, so it's very translucent, and adding some area to kind of mix them together. So this is how it dried. You can see we've got some nice like rolling areas of grass. Feels like there's more of a shadow underneath something, maybe this tree section over on the left-hand side and coming darker into that front corner. If you're working on a larger scale, you can of course work in longer strokes. So this is something where if I was working with like a looser grass, not so recently cut, or if the painting itself was a bigger scale, I might work more at this kind of length on the right. And I hope that helps.